it's a death rehearsal. It's like, okay, this is the definitive end of the fertile window. So every choice that you've made till now, there's not remaking it. There's not a do-over.
Welcome to the Whose Body Is It podcast. I'm your host, Isabella Malvin. For those who don't know me, I'm a life coach, a hypnotist, a former birth worker, and a former liberal feminist turned radical truth teller. On this podcast, you'll learn about the ideologies, industries, and technologies attempting to control our minds and bodies, such as transgender ideology, pornography, prostitution, and the many tentacles of the medical industrial complex. Warning, while listening to this podcast, you might find yourself triggered or perhaps notice where you've been biting your tongue on the issues that matter most to you. In the masterclasses available on my site, as well as my one-on-one coaching and hypnosis, you will learn to stop getting triggered by every freaking thing, learn to cultivate resilience, gain knowledge, and, if we're working together one-on-one, stop unwanted behaviors and increase your self-confidence. You can book your first session and check out the masterclasses in the library at whosebodyisit.com. And I just want to say that it's because of your endless support that I'm able to interview amazing women, get their stories out, and produce regular content for you. So with that being said, please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel on YouTube. And if you're just listening in, leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and consider making a financial contribution via the link in my show notes. You can also support the podcast by getting your activist stickers. Pro-woman stickers have the power to intercept transhumanist programming. So take a photo of your stickers out in the wild and tag me on Instagram at Whose Body Is It. Without further ado, let's get into this week's story. Okay, one more thing. I'm so excited for you to listen to this episode with the amazing Kimberly Ann Johnson. Before we get into it, I want to just mention that in this episode, we touch on third-party reproduction, IVF, these experimental technologies, the influence that AI has on our reproductive system. And, most people have heard, about a couple and a friend who have had a baby through assisted reproductive technology or who have, used a third-party conception method like an egg donor or a sperm donor or even, renting a woman. But most people have not heard about the risks, the complications, and the legal problems that may arise. I've got a masterclass in the library with the industry expert, Jennifer Law. This class will help you navigate the really difficult conversations around this hot topic of the new modern family formation and what is at stake for women and children. You can find this class in the episode show notes. I cannot recommend it enough. Whether you are considering third-party reproduction or are a practitioner, someone who works with women, maybe you are an acupuncturist, a counselor, social worker. We've even had MDs take this class. This is how hidden this information is, even from people who work in the industry. Some of these people don't even know this stuff. I cannot emphasize the impact that this class can have on not just one woman and her family, but future generations to come. Oh, I'm so excited. Kimberly, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation, to bring your knowledge, expertise, personal experience on the topic of menopause without Big Pharma, without hormones. For my listeners who are not already familiar with you and your work, would you mind first telling us how you got into the realm of women's health and well-being?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Isabella. I like to say that I work at the intersection of sex, birth, and trauma. So I come to all of this as a dancer and a yoga teacher. So I come from a somatic background. Now that somatics is all the rage, it can kind of be a clip on to other things, but that's really how I have approached my life and approached women's health. Then I had a baby, and everything that I thought I knew about my body and my structure, my spirituality, my sexuality changed. And as a result of that process of trying to heal myself without surgery, because I was told that I needed a full pelvic floor reconstruction, I wrote the book, The Fourth Trimester. And that was sort of my love letter to anyone who thought there might be another way to go through the postpartum time that's not just about depression or abating anxiety, but actually, like, how could you have a thriving postpartum time? And I've never had another baby since, so I never got to live that experience, but I have gotten to live it vicariously through a lot of people who write me. And then I became a postpartum doula at a certain point. Then I got a certificate in sexological bodywork. I was already a structural integration practitioner, which is Rolfing. So I already knew how to work on a lot of connective tissue. We work in the nose and the mouth, but I'd never been trained in the genitals because, of course, genitals are always off limits and shrouded in, you know, mystification. And I needed internal work after I had a baby, and then women started telling me their stories. Like, my tailbone's been broken for 3 years, and I would say, well, has anybody worked on it? And they would say no, and I would say, oh my gosh, do you want me to try? And then I would do it, and then their tailbone would get better, or their prolapse, or their incontinence, or their hemorrhoids, or whatever it was. So for 3 years, I did 800 sessions, female pelvis, exclusive to birth injuries, gynecological surgeries, and sexual boundary ruptures. And out of that experience coincided then with Me Too. And when I saw what happened with Me Too, from a nervous system perspective, I was very concerned with this sort of like mass unveiling without spaces to hold what that is to unveil it. And so I just recorded a video that at the time I thought went viral, but now that we have like, you know, millions of views, it wasn't that many. It was like 20,000 on a Facebook Live. But I was talking about the predator and the prey in the nervous system, and how as humans we need to have that full spectrum experience, and that the female nervous system tends to be wired towards flight, freeze, and fawn, and how to specifically work with that. Because I had practices all over the country, and including Canada, and the wait lists were berserk. And I was like, I have to help more people. I have to go like farther upstream so that people can understand these mechanics, so that these dynamics can start to shift. Out of that, I wrote the book, The Call of the Wild, How We Heal Trauma, Awaken Our Power, and Use It for Good. I wish it was called How Women Heal Trauma, but at the time, my publishers were not wanting to use the word woman in the title of a book. And that book came out in April 2021. And that was right around the time that I entered perimenopause. I entered it actually March 2020, like the minute I was in New York, and when I didn't have a period for the lockdown. So I thought, oh, well, maybe I'm just really super sensitive and all of this shock is in my body. The moment I came back to California, which is where I'm from, in June, I got a cycle. But looking back, that was the beginning of my perimenopause, menopause. And now I'm 18 months past my last bleed. So menopause is not like other stages of a woman's life, because you don't know that it's happened until after it's happened. But my entire career as a birth doula and most of my work is, and the way that I live my life, you know, I had a home birth, is non-interventionist. I have enough robust health in my system too that I haven't really had to rely on, and not many emergencies to rely on big pharma. But the reason that I reached out to you, there's really two reasons, but one of them is that I've just been so shocked at the people that I used to be in alignment with, people who were birth workers with me, who were totally also pro physiological birth, home birth, of course, women's rights, but also like pro breastfeeding, but that believe in the human body, that believe in mammalian system, that don't think that there's just like something wrong
Mm-hmm.
with how the female body works and adapts. At this juncture of a woman's life, the menopausal window, just completely were like, oh, you have to take HRT. Yoga teachers, you have to take HRT. And so I don't even think HRT is a good phrase, hormone replacement therapy. It should just be called HT, hormone therapy, because you're not replacing anything. We're not supposed to have those hormones for our whole
Yeah.
life. We're just inputting something that, because we have loss aversion. So Yeah, I'm a single mom to a 17-year-old. She's going to college this year. I am married now. My husband lives in Brazil and doesn't have a US visa. And I'm working on two books right now. One that's on the parallels of women's sexual paths and spiritual paths and includes the stages of women's lives because I do believe that these phases also have openings and portals that are available to us as we
Yeah.
live through them and with them. And then the other one on menopause.
Amazing. What a succinct summary. I, as you were sharing, I want to go back to your first book and the experience of you said living vicariously through all the women that have read your book, and I didn't have, I don't think I had a single client in New York, and I had dozens who did not have a copy of your book when I was a birth and postpartum doula. The postpartum work was personally like, yeah, I mean, I actually the other day I had the thought like, fuck the podcast. I'm just gonna go back to being a postpartum doula. That is how rewarding that
Mm.
work is. That time spent in the home with a woman and her baby. So as you're sharing, yeah, I'm having all these flashbacks to being a doula in New York City in 2016. Yeah, and what a time and what a different time we're in now, where your now publisher for your most recent book won't let you use the word, discourage you from including the word woman in the title. So it's wow. So the first thing I want to speak to also is the euphemism, the language, the hormone replacement, which is also euphemistic. Like, well, it's just not accurate because we replace something that we need, something that we've lost that we're going to need again, right? So even that, it's just like hormone dispenser. We like um, hormone additive. Like they should call it the hormone additive agenda, just as something, just as we if we were to block something that is a natural process would also be uh anti-physiological, as you're saying.
Yeah, so I think it is really important because a lot of what we're up against is what in the nervous system is loss aversion. So because I'm 50 right now, my algorithm feeds me all kinds of things. Certain things I've thought of and certain things I never thought of. Like it feeds me things about like my face shape. So like when you're menopausal, your face instead of a reverse triangle becomes like a circle or something. And when you see the which seems weird because like everybody doesn't have the same face shape, but basically you get jowls, and so it like
Mm.
rounds out your face right here, and then you get the skin crepiness, and then certain things you might have even noticed, but they didn't come all the way to your conscious awareness until you see it like 5 times, and then you're like, whoa, yeah, okay, I guess this really is happening. And the fourth trimester really tried to define this as a period of time for people that most people didn't think was something special. It was just like you have the baby and then you get better. There's not like a period of time. So I used other cultures as examples to show like, no, in India there's the sacred window, and in China they're sitting the nest. And this is a period of time that's important. And if you don't respect the period of time, number one, it lasts longer. So all of the impacts are going to carry through for way longer. And number two, then we're going to pathologize it and we're going to call it a mental health problem. And we're going to try to solve it with biochemistry instead of solving it from a culture perspective and from, really just a biological, physiological perspective. Which is also what's weird is that all of these doctors now that have been, like you said, whistleblowers, or have been really the doctors that will cross the line to help, like that will go against pharma, or that will be skeptical on this point, seems to be the one thing that everybody across the board now is, if you are a responsible provider, then you would provide hormones to women at this phase of life, because women couldn't possibly go through perimenopause and menopause without these hormones. And the messaging is really that you're negligent if you don't do it. And it's the same kind of messaging women get in birth, where it's like, why wouldn't you just get the epidural? Like, what are you fighting for? Are you trying to win an award? Then it's like, why wouldn't you just take these hormones? Like, are you trying to get some kind of special prize for doing this without support? And when I started noticing all these parallels, it was like, wow, we're back to infantilizing women. We're back to problematizing the female body. We're back to pathologizing life stages that somehow, having a period is this big problem you're supposed to solve, that having a baby is like this big medical emergency. And now, menopause, if you're informed about it, you better fight for those hormones. And if you tell an OBGYN that's one of these menopause doctors that hormones are overprescribed, they'll say, no way, only 2% of menopausal age women are on hormones. But if you also ask, well, how long are you supposed to be on them for? They'll say 10 years at the minimum. And why not still take them into your 70s? Because you'll feel great. And
Yeah.
so to me, I'm like, there's so many things, Isabella. Like this goes in so many different, it's a fractal that goes in so many different directions. I mean, I can also tell you, I'm not one of these. There's other women out there that are like, menopause is a scam. It doesn't exist. If you're healthy, you won't experience the impacts of it in other cultures. That's not my experience. So I'm not saying like menopause is a smooth ride. It has not been a smooth ride for me. There's reasons why it hasn't been a smooth ride too, and I've made a lot of adjustments based on it. So I'm not saying that some people might not need hormones through this transition. In fact, I've interviewed people on my podcast who were completely aligned and non-interventionists, but they didn't sleep for an entire year and were filled with rage and could not work, and then took hormone therapy and were able to be functional. Obviously, there's circumstances where women need the support. But I'm talking about something that becomes episiotomies in the 80s. Oh, everybody needs an episiotomy. Oh, everybody needs hormones. That's what I'm talking about. And then furthermore, what I'm talking about is episiotomy is an individual scar tissue event that, of course, impacts the mother and impacts the baby and impacts erectile tissue. And we could argue that it impacts intergenerational birth. However, when we're talking menopause, it's impacting everyone around us because that's how hormones are. So, you've been at a birth. You've been at births where there is a hormonal cascade, and you've been at births where it doesn't happen. There's no oxytocin in the room. It's not an automatic. So, Western medicine knows nothing about the endocrine system, just to begin with. We're not machines, so it's not pieces and parts, as you know. We're not just input one thing and it doesn't affect everything. But it's also impactful for the people that are around us. So I was having all these symptoms, and I don't even like the word symptom because that sounds like you have a symptom when you're sick. That's like, so I don't know, indicators, experiences, physical changes that I was experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
And many of them shocking to me because I came to this portal already having done a lot of unshaming work in my pelvis, already trusting my body just as I did in birth, my diet being really female physiology focused. So I just thought, and I guess it's a bit of arrogance, I just thought it wouldn't be that hard for me. I thought I would traverse it pretty easily. And in fact, partially because of being a single mom and running a big business and just running my adrenals. Adrenals are a big part of how you go through menopause. So how much yin availability you have is probably going to impact it. And I'm a low hormone person to begin with. I have dry skin. I never had any of the estrogenous, like I didn't have sore breasts very often. I mean, my periods were pretty easy. I only ever had one pregnancy, one baby. It's just, I wasn't a high hormone person to begin with. So I started having all kind. I mean, first of all, my energy was just, I was totally exhausted. But like a lot of women going through menopause right now, it's compounded by COVID, pandemic, everything, the social media, all of these other things. So you're going, well, is my brain fog because I have long COVID? Is that even a thing? Is it because I moved across country twice because I tried to, is it because
Went off
the
grid and then came back on the grid.
yeah, I mean, there's like, you just are like, well, or just it's all exhausting.
Yeah.
And then my vaginal tissue, lots of women had talked to me about their vaginal tissue, and I just thought, well, they're not tuned in like that. And in fact, my own vaginal tissue started to thin and be painful. My clitoris, external clitoris shrunk. My inner labia started to just recede back into the rest of my vulva. My arousal didn't work the same. My joints were hurting, like things that I'm like, joints hurting. Like I've been a yoga practitioner and a dance, like that's never happened in my life. So there were a lot of things happening. So over time, I was trying to figure it out, go to a naturopath. I tried to do this thing called the Dutch test where you do urine samples for like over a period of time. It took me forever to do because of just all of the demands of my life, but I finally did it. By the time I got a naturopath to look at it, he was like, "You've got no hormones in your body." I was like, "Well, that's impossible." Like, because I'm
Not
not
even cortisol?
lying.
Yeah, not even adrenaline or
Here
cortisol?
I am, like, wow, it's a miracle that I'm a walking, standing person. And so he was like, "So you've got nothing left, but don't worry." And this was a 15-minute telehealth consult. And I asked if he wanted me to come to the office, and he's like, "No, don't worry about it. We don't need to do that." So somebody who's never even seen my full body, never met me, and he goes, "We'll just replace them all." And I go, "Well, what do you mean?"
Oh
And
my
he's
God,
like,
this is like
"Well,
a horror movie. This is a scary, out of context. This is, you have nothing in you and we're going to replace everything.
yeah." But I mean, for him, this was like, he was recommended to me by a holistic person. I mean, he was a holistic naturopath. He wasn't an MD, he's a hormone specialist. So he was like, "We'll give you estrogen, estradiol, progesterone, and testosterone." And I was getting married in like 6 weeks. And I was having all my vaginal pH really changed too, which was something I hadn't experienced. So there's so many things that were happening. So I'm like thinking to myself, well, I don't know if I'm going to take all this, but like, okay. So I get it in the mail, and it comes in the mail with a piece of paper. And the piece of paper says, "Beware of taking these hormones. When you take them, do not touch a baby within 3 hours or a small animal because it can cause vulvar swelling and it can cause an animal that's already been spayed to go into heat." And I thought to myself, so I'm going to have sex with my husband, and I'm going to think that none of this is going to get transmitted into his body. I'm going to just imagine that, like, I'm going to pee this out into the water supply, that we're all so concerned about phytoestrogens and plastics and extra estrogen. And I'm going to think that this isn't a part of that. So my intuition was that I needed a little bit of estrogen, but the estrogen came mixed together with testosterone, so I couldn't even take them separately. So I just took them with me. I was going on a trip, and I was going out into nature where like I wasn't going to be on the computer, and I was doing my work. I was teaching a training called Mothering the Bones, and I just didn't take them. And 6 weeks later, I went to Brazil, I got married, and I felt totally different, and I hadn't taken them. And it was because I was out of stress, and I was surrounded by other women. I was surrounded doing the work that I love. I was in nature. So that's my story with that, was just I just haven't taken them. And then I went to a different naturopath, and I've been on a lot of different kinds of supplements specific to certain other things. Because, like any big life stage change, like postpartum, it's a liminal time. So other imbalances in your system come to the surface. So, like, I have genital herpes, so like way more likely to have outbreaks because my system doesn't have the same kind of robustness. And with the tissue thinning, the virus kind of comes through. So there's just like a lot of changes that I made. I decided to let all of my employees go 15 months ago. So I had a lot of people working for me on retainers, and it was just a lot to carry. And people kept being like, just once you do this, then you can step aside. And like, once you do this, you'll be able, but like, I was never getting the right combination. And so I just decided to unplug it all. And at midlife, which for me has been this like, it's a death rehearsal. It's like, okay, this is the definitive end of the fertile window. I mean, for me, my end was at 42 in my consciousness, but so every choice that you've made till now, there's not remaking it. There's not a do-over.
Mm.
So it's a really looking back on all of these choices that I've made and choices in parenting. And this is coinciding also with my daughter leaving the house and a different phase of my life. And I'm visibly older. When people would used to say, "Oh, you look like sisters," now they're imagining that I'm some like a 20-year-old's mom, which a 20-year-old is only 3 years older than my daughter, but it's an adjustment because there is it's a pretty the aging thing happens fast in a short period of time. And so you're like, wow, okay, I've got no waistline now. And like my clothes don't fit well, but I'm not doing anything differently. And it can feel like if you're not used to understanding your body as an ally and as a compass, and that there's so much more beyond what meets the eye, it can feel like you're being punished or that you've done something wrong and that wrong thing you should fix.
Mm.
Um, so when you only look at it of everything you're losing, and we live in a culture where there's not very many models of what you might be gaining by going through this passage and by surrendering yourself to an underworld journey, and that's what it was. I was awake at night, and at some point, because I had breastfed a lot, it was like, okay, I'm supposed to be awake at night now. Like this is an experience of the dark, and that's what like. And I
Mm.
actually began to like it. I wanted to go into yin spaces. I needed contained small spaces. I needed to reduce the demands. I needed to tend to myself in a different way. And I ended up finding a practitioner who I'd worked with before. She's 80 and she went through the change without hormones. And I was able to do somatic work with her and soul work with her, but also receive her counsel because, again, you get all the messages like, why this is dumb, just take the hormone. Why are you resisting this so much? Maybe the fact that you're resisting it means you need it. And I wasn't 100% against it. Like I said, I have it. I actually still have it in the fridge, I think. But I just couldn't imagine, because I know how the culture feels about fertile women, and I know how the culture wants maiden over everything. It's like the maiden body, the maiden hormonal configuration, the maiden availability, the maiden lack of discernment. And we don't even really have crones. Like you can, if you try to think of a crone, because I'm not a crone, there's like a 20-year stage where I'm not going to bleed before I become a crone. So there's such a blind spot about anything that could be beneficial about aging. And I'm really lucky because during this period of time, I started working with Stephen Jenkinson, who wrote a book on dying, and he wrote a book on elderhood.
Mm.
And so I was really in this conversation, in again so many fractals of how the culture is built towards anything that's new. New is better, innovate, younger. All of social media is focused towards youth, right? Like anyone over 50 can't even work social. I mean, I can't make a reel at this point. Like it's outgrown my own way of being engaged. So I was able to really sit with, wow, maybe I've got a responsibility to my aging face.
Mm.
And maybe it's not just to me, maybe it's to those around me. And also maybe it's to those who've already crossed the veil so they can recognize me. And, maybe I have a responsibility to go through, especially as someone who so many people look to for wisdom and I didn't martyr myself. I didn't do it because I thought other people were going to ask me about it. I did it because this was what was true to my soul and my knowing. And I had this feeling that it was like puberty or like postpartum,
Mhm.
where, okay, my body's changing in all these ways, but it's a phase. And you're not in puberty forever, you're not postpartum forever. So if I really do the phase, if I just really go there, then maybe I'll really come out of it. And I can say that right now, I think I'm coming out of it. It's 18 months, and I'd say it was really intense for 3 to 4 years. And now I feel a vitality underneath it, like I'm not exhausted. Before I would find my way to arousal, but now I'm feeling genital arousal specifically again. Not that I don't have to like really hunt for. Like, when you're, at least for me when I was young, it felt like the water was always boiling and it was just right there whenever. And also I could guide a lot of interactions because I just sort of let the snake loose and like that would make the thing happen. And this more felt like, okay, I think there's a pot on the stove and I think there's water in it. And I guess I'll have to remember to walk over there and turn it on. And it required a lot more of my partner. And you know, that's not a fun experience. Like it didn't feel good. It was challenging and there was fear and grief, a lot of grief. I can still feel the grief. I mean, I only really learned how to surf my cycles in my mid 30s. So that means I got like only a third of the time with my cycles where I really was living with it and enjoying it. And then now it's gone and it's disorienting. It's like I had an orbit and it was fairly predictable. And if I was really tired, for instance, I would be like, well, I'm almost going to ovulate, so I'm just going to go to the gym and that'll give me more energy. Or if I'm almost going to bleed, yeah, I should probably just rest. And you just get spit out of that orbit. It's like being a
Mhm.
satellite that gets spit out. And then you're like trying to figure, because you might not get a period for 45 days, or then you might get two really close together. So you can't really use that anymore as the thing that's the predictable orienter.
Right.
And that's sad in some ways and it's confusing. And for me, there was a lot of grief. But like I said earlier, I do think that that's a death rehearsal. It's like I'm going through that now. Not that death is going to be easy, because I don't think that. But it allows me to be present to the truth of what is possible for someone at my age. And it was also challenging because I kind of am at the peak of my career. So it's like you're at the peak of your career. I'm an entrepreneur. I've never had a paycheck, and I'm going like, oh my God, I'm gonna like take it all apart right now, like right when it's just like everything is available to me. But I had to have the long view of, yeah, but what's 1 year or 2 years or 3 years? Like
Right.
this is literally what my
Yeah.
soul is asking me for.
Right. And what's the work if you're bypassing the experience in your body? Like
Yeah.
it's yeah. There's so many truth bombs, so many insightful points about your experience, and like my first thought is, wow, what a gift you've given to your daughter to be able to witness, for her to witness you going through this. That's something that I've mourned with the women in my life. Not all of the women, but definitely the women that I'm related to by blood have all done the standard HRT, and I've expressed a lot of grief about it with my mom. I'm also an only child, grew up with a single mom, so I didn't get to watch her give birth or go through that process. I was on the pill, but not till my 20s and only for about a year. I've definitely mourned, and we've talked about it. Yeah, not getting to see the women around me go through the natural aging process, also not go through menopause. It's a lot. And I mean, I think it's really, I don't know if you would agree, but you know, when people say like we birth the way that we live, right? It would make sense that women would menopause the way that they live.
Mhm.
So if they're in a medicated state, if they're living in a paradigm where they're not seeing the value in sitting in the discomfort, or they're just living in the typical, you know, modern society where if you do want to make the choice to sit in the discomfort, it does come at a cost. Like I always think about this with I used to get migraines and I never took anything and I didn't want to. I just thought, I'm a maiden. I work for myself. I could actually just like be in bed for 9 hours and go through whatever this is and sit with it. And I know it's going to end. And I'll make some inquiry as to why they're coming in the first place. But even that was so like I didn't even care to get to the bottom of it. It was
Mm.
so like, and that took me years to not reach for the Aleve or the Advil when I had cramps or a tummy ache or whatever. Oh, you mentioned the naturopath who I just stay naturopaths. Because I've been to so many and I've been on the protocols and I've been on the things, and the same kind of fix it energy can be applied no matter what it is, whether it's herbs, whether it's um, meditation. Like some things actually don't need to be fixed, right? Which
Mhm.
is like what you're describing is it uncomfortable? Is it unpredictable? Is it inconvenient? Is it filled with grief? Yes. And what if we don't actually have to do anything about it? And the framing, your framing of like, if you don't do anything about it, then you're negligent is the same, like you mentioned, with the birth. And I also, you had a great reel that I saw on your Instagram about, like if you're not doing gua sha, if you're not doing like face yoga, you're also considered negligent now, right? It can be applied. It doesn't have to be HRT. It could be Washa stone. So it really, what you've described is really radical in the sense that making the choice to just not do, just to let be and discover. You know, you mentioned the experiencing the darkness of the night,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it feels a lot of it feels like the image that comes to me is like a cat that's like claws are in the wall and they're and people are just like hanging on however. And I agree with you about the how you live is how you birth, but that's what at this juncture has shocked me so much is that the people that to me it's just out of left field that they're advocating for
Yeah.
hormone therapy. Like in every other life stage, they were like, yes, no birth control, this, and this, and yes, this. And now, I can't even stomach any of the menopause information out there. Last Christmas, so not this one because we're in January, but the one before, I read 20 menopause books. I was like, all right, fine, I'm just going to read them. They were with the exception of two, all terrible. And the two ones that were even worth it were written by an Australian and an Irish person. Like the Americans, we can't get it. We're just like we're too indoctrinated. We're too new of a country. We don't, you go to England or Ireland and you'll see some old faces. Like
Mm,
there are people who, and I'm sure there's some places in the U.S. too. I mean, I live in San Diego, so Southern California is like Miami or New York. It's a
yeah.
whole other thing. But that's what I just can't. I'm like, wow, how are people blanking out so hard? Like, how are you coherent in what you think and believe
Yeah.
until this moment? And then I've seen that too a little bit with women who are into natural health and then they put their daughters on birth control. There's like some kind of thing that's in their psyche that's still underneath it that's too afraid that
Mm,
they just are like, okay, I'm just gonna do just put her on birth control kind of thing.
yeah.
But with this passage, I mean, there's some very simple things. One of them is when you come out of postpartum, you're still young. But when you come out of menopause, you're not young anymore.
Mm,
And it's a strange thing to say for me at least to say the words like I'm not fertile. And when you say that to somebody, what they normally will say back to you is, well, yes, you are. It's just not in that same kind of a way. Like you're fertile. It's just your creative life, your creative projects. But like it can't just be like, no, you are not a fertile woman
yeah.
anymore.
Yeah. The episode that you listened to with Mary Lou, was it the early childbearing one? Is that the one? Because
Yeah.
Mary Lou, okay, I've interviewed Mary Lou like at least 4 or 5 times, but I'm
Oh, okay.
assuming I want to make sure it was that one because we talked about, if you remember, we talked about the gray hair, right? Like, and her having to accept, like, when all her gray hair came in, not just like 30s gray hair, but like when it all started to come in. I know you're a redhead, so you don't have this problem.
Mhm.
um,
Well, I have white.
not problem. Oh, you do. But isn't
Yeah,
it
I
true
have
that
white.
redheads like it takes longer?
Probably. I mean, I'm not going to go gray. Some people
It's
are
gonna
going to
be
think
white.
that it's like blonde, but
Yeah.
it is changing. Yeah.
Cool. And I just caught myself calling it a problem. It's not a problem, but when Mary Lee talked about like the fact that she's a grandmother now, like being buff, like helping her buffer the like conditioning that she has around. Okay, well, I'll go in all gray now. It's like she's not on like a woman who is a grandmother. Well, it depends how old you are. Okay, in Mary Lou's case, right? She was describing the process of like not being on the reproductive market.
Right.
Like the gray is like it's in sync. Like, and of course we know there are fertile women who do get gray hair earlier. And I was expressing my sadness around getting some gray hair only because I'm not a mother yet. But if I was a mother, I'd be like, oh my God, it's like 4 hairs, whatever, you know? But, you know, we also talked a lot about in that episode how, you know, the later we delay childbearing, uh, the more like, gosh, I think the more susceptible we are to all of the consumer, uh, the marketing to be
Hmm.
younger because there is something off, right? There is something out of sync based on our life cycle.
Yeah.
And so it's really hitting a nerve, like, and this is unconscious. And I'm speaking to women who want to be at a different, you know, life cycle than where they are, or reproductive cycle where they are.
I mean, to me, it seems the parallel is like there's these physical markers that are showing us aging that are generally in sync with certain stages, and Chinese medicine talks all about that. I mean, I also want to make a point. Like, I'm not I'm not also just these are the extremes that are presented in the polarity. Either you really care about yourself and you keep yourself up, and part of that is that you're going to start exercise. I mean, if you follow the directions, you basically have to become a different person because you got to eat differently, you got to exercise differently, you got to like do I mean, it's bonkers. It's like you're already exhausted, and then it's like, oh no, now you need to eat 30 grams of protein every time you exercise, and then forget about those, you know, low weights, high reps. Now you got to lift until you exhaust your muscles. And then to do that, you got to find somebody who's going to help you do that, right? And then are you even in shape, and do you have good enough alignment to even go do that without hurting yourself? And then, you know, how do you eat 30 grams of protein a day and all this stuff? And some of the things I'm saying, I have done, and I have done in different cycles, and I have made
Mhm.
adjustments, of course, because um, I'm not just sitting here going like I'm fine if I have bone degeneration, and who
Mhm.
cares if I have a heart attack. But these like osteoporosis and heart health, that's really for people who have a history of those things. I don't
Yeah.
have a history of that in my family. I have no predisposition for it. If I had any indicators that that was something that I might have, then I would be treating this differently.
Mhm.
You know? Yeah.
With the I want to just mention the bone loss, like that's a real hitter because it still doesn't make sense to me because you know, okay, so let me backtrack. There's this guy named Dr. Marty McCary who is a whistleblower for kind of the things that I cover here. He's like vaccine critical, pharma critical. He talks about physiological birth, but he's a huge proponent of HRT, and he uses the example of like a woman falling, and he's like, well, you know, if you get a fracture, it's a cascade of things that happen, then you're not mobile, then the next thing you're dead. You know, like he uses like fear mongering, like, and that's not to say that a fracture can't lead to lots of unwanted consequences if there isn't like proper rehabilitation, but to use that as like the main talking point
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I
doesn't
also
make
don't
sense.
know what happens at that 10-year mark. Is it just easy to go off them at that point and you just go off and it's fine? Because a lot of what's happening now too is that women are going in and saying that they're depressed and anxious, right? So anxiety is something that happens because there's early morning cortisol spikes. And it's the first time in my life that I felt, oh, this is definitively physiologically caused. Like, this is not because I'm having ruminating thoughts. My heart rate is up when I wake up, and that's causing the cyclical rumination. And so then women go to the doctor and they say that. And now, what good menopausal care is like noticing that and giving someone hormones instead of antidepressants. And so you could be 5 years post bleed, and you could go and say, like, I'm really down, and they could put you on estrogen. And that's considered like a good standard of care based on your age and your life stage.
Hmm.
And there are so many ramifications to going off antidepressants. And there's all these other circumstances where people are taking hormones, whether that's for transitioning, whether that's for birth control. And we know that we don't know what we're doing. It's obvious. It's obvious that this is like dart throwing, and that it doesn't matter how specialized people are. When hormone therapy became under criticism was in like 2002, that there was this one study, and that study itself
Yes.
changed and made people think it wasn't
that was going to
It
give
was
you breast
risky.
cancer.
Right.
Yeah.
So now all the doctors are saying that wasn't a good study. And I just also think that people should look at how the doctors look that they're listening to. Because a lot of the doctors themselves look like they are not at all okay with aging in any way. And if I thought it was coherent, where I was like, well, yeah, that person lives in a really medicalized way. And of course, we haven't even talked about things like Botox, where we've just normalized so many things that we call procedures that surgery seems kind of normal. So, and I just know this from a nervous system perspective that once you breach some of these boundaries, whether they're skin boundaries or surgical boundaries, they're a lot easier to do. Your psyche doesn't have the same response to it.
Mm.
But also, when so many women are having late in life pregnancies, those are threshold events. And so I know people who have had gotten abortions at 45, for instance, and that sets them into perimenopause. So it's very likely that if you're having a late in life pregnancy that you're going to become perimenopausal or menopausal immediately after because of the extreme amount of stress that it is on your system. I don't even know about the word perimenopause, honestly, because at this point, to me, it sounds like because we've pathologized every stage. I've had clients that are 21 that come to me because they think they're infertile, and I'm like, why? And they're like, well, I've been on the pill since I was 14, and then I've been off 3 months and I haven't gotten pregnant. And I'm like, that's not a fertility problem. Like, but because fertility is an industry and everyone hears about how hard it is to get pregnant and how infertile everybody is, they
Yeah.
take that collective reality and put that on their individual experience. And so to me, I look at this and I go, oh, okay, so now every fucking stage of a woman's life is a problem. So it's a problem to get pregnant. It's a problem to have a period. It's a problem to get pregnant. So everybody's doing all this preventative stuff like egg freezing. I'm like, you're 31 years old. Why are you freezing eggs? Oh, because I still want to have my career and do this. So you think it's just as normal to create a baby with a frozen egg as to have a physiological event? And I'm really concerned about 2 to 3 generations from now that people won't even be able to have babies by having sex anymore. It's going to be like lore, like, oh, my grandmother actually had sex with someone to have a baby. So all of this stuff,
Yes.
I mean, it's
Yes. Yeah, but
real.
it already happens. I am aware of multiple couples who are married who do not have sex, who went third party reproductive technology route. They are married and don't have sex.
Yeah. No, I have also people in my world where they're doing fertility rounds of IVF. And then I finally said, well, are you guys having sex? And it's like, no. And it's like, well, is there any reason to believe that you couldn't get pregnant by having sex? No. And then I just sort of like, I don't have anything else to say because I'm like, well, it's hard for me to understand why those are interchangeable. That's part of this fractal as human body as machine rather than human body as animal living organism, human body as intelligent, human body as a receptor for other kinds of intelligence. And you can feel it. Does somebody think that having a frozen egg and then knows how long it's frozen, and maybe it even is a surrogate, or maybe it's them, or maybe it's somebody else's frozen egg, because now I've in some doula groups I'm in, I see people selling embryos. I'm like,
Yep.
what? When I was in college, which is a long time ago, we had ethics classes about organ selling because we knew that if you were going to sell organs, then people in developing countries would be farmed for organs. And that's what people do. They go to India and they have an Indian person be a surrogate because they can pay them cheaper. But the level of entitlement that we've arrived to, that everybody deserves a child and they deserve it by any means necessary, and they deserve it, that they should be able to live any way they want and then still get what they want.
Mhm.
It's mind blowing to me. And so I just see that with the pathologization of each stage, then it just becomes obvious, like, well, then why wouldn't you just continue on?
Totally.
Um, and why would you want to ever be older? Because if it doesn't matter what age you are when you're like, it's fine to be a 48-year-old mom, when really you should be a 48-year-old grandmother. People just, it doesn't really matter. It's so ironic though, because everybody's decries the absence of the village, but in these behaviors we degenerate the village
Hmm.
because we degenerate generations. There's How are you going to have even your bloodline if these reproductive intervals are so wide?
And I think it's also a vanity thing. I mean, obviously it's the industry, right? If we can eliminate the industry, if we can have uh gatekeeping with the industry, then people are not going to be able to make these choices as easily. And we already see this, like it limits the it if what it limits the demand, the harder it is. Here in Israel, lots of gay couples go gay men primarily go to Europe to farm to grow their kids. It's absolutely revolting. It's obviously prevalent in the US, but it's state by state. But you do reduce the demand by making it, then you have to fly and then you have to coordinate and then it's like
Yeah. I mean, I
so
guess for me, I think that there are circumstances like gay women. Uh, and obviously, from the beginning of time, there have been gay people figuring out ways to have children. But I feel again that there's things that could be the exception that are now being standardized as the rule. Like if it was possible for people to, same with HRT, it's like sure some people are going to need some support, but how does that become everybody needs it? Some
right,
people
right.
may need
Yeah.
reproductive support, but how does that become now it's available to everybody? And
Because the word support has been so blurred. Like we're supposed to feel
yeah,
bad for a lesbian couple who can't physically produce a child. Like it's impossible. Like it's literally physiologically impossible. And we're supposed to the blurring of justice is I think where
yeah,
we've gotten real messed up. I hold the same accountability for whether it's a male couple or a female couple who
mm-hmm.
are exploiting other people, other body parts, being a part of this industry, using the market, exploiting themselves. It's all a really big mess. You mentioned the oh yes, the gap, the generational, like the procreation, there being so much time between each generation having kids. And also I'm imagining like the woman who's 48, who's just bought an egg from Europe, used her husband's frozen sperm, she's carried the baby, she's getting to have this like semblance of normalcy, right? And the kind of the what she says she wants, right, which is to have the baby. Does this woman, these are real women. Do these women really want to then go right in to menopause, like just from a entitlement perspective? Like wouldn't like I would imagine that she wants to have some buffer to be able to experience this, like what is truly like a fake uh not that women can't be mothers while they're going through menopause, but this artificial window, which
Well, a
really
lot of people try to, I mean, I worked with a lot of people that were reversing menopause to be able to get pregnant. I mean, I did work with a fair number of people in their early 40s that had been through several rounds because technically they were menopausal and they were reversing reversing that or suspending or whatever. I just
it feels like manipulation. Like it's such a tempting offer to manipulate oneself that I can
yeah,
see why women do it.
I guess I that makes me question like, well, what is underlying how I've come to I think that I'm just very devoted to reality and I'm very devoted to the female body and the wisdom of the female body. And I've just seen so many outcomes of what happens when we distort and interfere. And I also always want people to know that I'm not really talking from a moral point of view. Like I'm not talking from, okay, so if you did this, you're a bad person, or people who take hormone therapy are bad people. I'm not even saying like, oh, they're sheep. I'm just saying what are the mechanisms that are underlying it, and with something that's supposed to be this quick fix, like it's just no big deal, and that's how all these things are presented. It's just no big deal. Even abortion, it's like it's presented like it's no big deal, and then when I'm counseling people as they're going through it, it's like they're so shocked at
Yeah.
how intense it is, um, because it's so minimized. Like, oh yeah, just freeze your eggs. It's like, as far as I can tell from the people around me that have done it, it's hormonally gnarly. And then why do we think women are having so much trouble in menopause? Partially because a lot of them have been through all of these stages
Oh,
prior
IVF. Yeah.
with hormone drops.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
maybe not just IVF, maybe a lot of other things too. So it's like, yeah, if you've already had hormonal intervention for certain things, then that stuff gets compounded. And I just know that because that's how the body works. Like we have things that are called associative stacks, and they stack up, and then there's a threshold point, and at some threshold point it kicks the body into some kind of autoimmune condition, or a host of other things. And it just feels like the it's so easy to pathologize this rather than use these things as benchmarks for how we talk to the youth. And that's why I loved your episode with Mary Lou, because I just thought, I mean, people freak out when I say that I tell my daughter who's 17 that she should think about having a baby in her 20s. And they go, well, what happens if it doesn't happen? And it's like, nothing happens. Like, that's life, because we don't control life, and we don't just dial
She's not
babies up.
exiled from the clan.
Like, nothing happens. But that's very different messaging than saying, um, have a baby whenever you want. You can always freeze your eggs. Just
Right.
live your life and just do you, and you find out who you are, and then you can go and do this. And so I really respect my peers in their 40s who may be doing reproductive technology, but they're also saying, I don't want this for my kids.
Yeah.
That I am doing it because I ended up here because of the messaging that I received, but this is not the messaging. Instead of defending it and being like, everybody should have this, and I think it's just fine,
Mm.
they're not doing that. And they're saying, yeah, I find myself here. I wish I didn't, but I did because I was told this other thing. And so to me, telling females, women, girls that, yeah, you should plan on partnering and having babies in your 20s means that maybe they'll do it at 32 or 33 instead of tell them to do it in their 30s, and then they're at 44 telling me that women who are in their 40s can most definitely have babies. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I know they can, but I also know a lot of people having a lot of trouble trying to get pregnant at 38 and 40. And
Yeah.
again, I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm not saying you're a bad person. I'm just saying let's get right with the female body and physiology. Let's be realistic about it. Let's not apply our idea about freaking space that we need to like find other planets. Let's not apply that to the body. We don't need to find new ways to reproduce. We just need to respect the way that reproduction works. And we need to teach our girls and our boys how that works so that the boys are also. I watched this movie recently. Did you watch it? I was so bummed. It was advertised as a rom-com, but then what it ended up being was a cancer movie. I was like, fwa fwa. But in the cancer movie, Frances Pugh is the woman. The man falls in love with her, and like on their third date basically says like, I really want a baby and I'm falling in love with you. And what the screenwriters did with that was, she got all righteous, like, you should choose me whether or not I want a baby, and da da da. And I was like, wow, that is so unusual to have a man who's that aware of fertility and lifetime and knows what he wants, and then to actually bring that in the conversation, and then even that's not the right way to be, then he's like wrong, because and he comes back and says, no, I want you anyway, and blah blah blah. But yeah, I think that it has to do with how the rites of passage coming into fertility and
Yeah,
really helping the younger generation navigate that rather than imagine that this is all just dial it up. It's all just if you have the money and you have the insurance and anything is possible any different way and it doesn't matter. Because I thought, do you think that these babies that are born from eggs, do you think they're going to know how to have that's their memory of conception? It's mind-blowing to
it's
me that
crazy.
people
And
think that is just as that it's just all everything is just as good as everything else, that like flattening
yep,
of everybody should have access to everything,
yep.
and like breastfeeding, bottle feeding doesn't matter. You do
All
you, just feed
all
it.
all birth is birth.
Right.
Men are women, women are men. Fed is best. Belly birth is birth. Oh, I got kicked out of a Facebook group for saying that belly birth was a destructive euphemism for C-section. You mentioned the people and the women in their 40s like using potentially doing like IVF and like wanting something else for their kids, but like the painful irony of like we know that the children born of these technologies are not healthy. We know this. And we keep doing it anyway. We know their outcomes are not just like all the other kids. And that
Mm.
doesn't mean but they're also saying like you can select one. Like we're going to ignore the fact that this is all experimental technology, but you can edit out certain genes. Isn't that wonderful that your child doesn't have to have the BRCA gene? But it's like it's this weird genetic mutation or whatever they're claiming to be able to erase to edit out. And I've interviewed I interview a lot of detrans women, a lot of women with different kinds of identity disorders, and I'm unsurprised every time they tell me that they were either adopted or born of IVF.
I'm not aware of any of the research in terms of health with in vitro babies or frozen embryos, but the one of the concerns, problems, considerations is that now we've got multiple generations born like this, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not, so
Yep.
when we say these things, like there's people that are my age that are the product of a sperm donor, then they say, well, so are you denying my existence? So you think I shouldn't be around? Or my siblings? Oh, so you think that my siblings' life is worth less or something? And it's like, no, I'm not really commenting on that particularly, but I can't see how there would be anything but a degeneration of health
Yep.
when you're mixing so much material. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's like three different things that are getting mixed together, and yeah, it's sort of like AI. It just gets more and more and more normalized. So that's why I wanted to have the conversation, because I hear things from people that I think I never would have heard it from them, but it's because it just starts to get, the more it happens, the more normal it is, and the more if you just got to go along with it, you
Right.
got to just like, you got to pretend that you can't tell your friend got a facelift. Like, it's like really weird. Like, wow, okay, I'm just supposed to pretend that you look the same, and or you just got a boob job, and I think we all find ourselves in these situations where our body is not, our female bodies specifically are not able to adapt to how much stress there is in the environment. And so things like breastfeeding are harder
Mm-hmm.
because on an individual level, we can't outrun the collective reality. But
Yeah.
we just have to have more relational, more tactile, more presence based ways to work with these things, because leaning to technology, I don't think is leading to the world that most of us want to live in.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. And I think it's so beautiful that this experience has led you into what sounds like has led you closer and more into the death work or talking about the death space. I saw you have a retreat coming up with Stephen and
Joshua Tree.
Joshua Tree. It looks amazing.
Mm.
And that natural progression of like, whoa, I'm not going to live forever. Like this does end at some point being the primer so that, when we as women do come into the death process, we have had the experience of ecstatic birth or difficult birth or just birth, going through the birth portal and then the menopause portal and then the death portal. I mean, it's a real privilege in this, as you mentioned, AI culture that we're in. I know this episode is going to resonate with so many women. I want to thank you again for all of your insights and sharing all of the. I really appreciate all the details that you showed, that you talked about. Like this is I don't know where women can get this information about like how their tissues are going to change. Like it's so yeah, we don't have enough models right now. So where can listeners find you and support your work?
I'm at KimberlyAnnJohnson.com, which is my full name because Kimberly Johnson is very common, so I had to use my middle name too. Same thing on Instagram. I also have a program called Mother Circle, and so it's mothercircle.com. And I do think that that is one place where we have these kinds of conversations. And what I like about it is there's mothers of all different ages and phases and ways. And it is a time to hear, women who have adult children talk to women who have toddlers. And I think that this lack of intergenerational exchange contributes to it because if you just hear, there's plenty of places people can hear their tissues are going to change. But what that's going to do is make people feel afraid and
Right,
feel like, oh my God, I better do something. And what I'm saying is my tissues changed in spite of the fact that I was doing a
right,
lot of things.
right,
And it's not a tragedy, and
right, right.
I still have sex and I am older and I am aging and I'm erotically alive and I'm willing to go through the process so that I can understand if this isn't a problem to solve and this isn't an illness to diagnose, then what is it? And I'm curious. I think it's a beautiful thing to be in a cyclical body. And as you said, a privilege that I even got this far to go through this phase. And that privilege doesn't mean it's easy. And I'm not bright siding it. And I'm not saying it doesn't exist either, like that if you just do everything right, you won't even go through it. So I crave the conversations myself because I get so frustrated
Mhm.
seeing the social media take on this. Like there's even a menopause documentary that's coming out, and we're going to find that it's very different from the messaging of business of being born and business of birth control. It's like now the
It's Ricky Lake
menopause.
and Abby,
Um,
their film?
uh, I don't think that I saw that Abby was participating, but I don't know if no, they didn't make it.
Oh,
But
okay.
it's
Okay.
like a PBS thing.
Okay.
But you're just going to see that, the
Mhm.
messaging that we've gotten as like, what does it mean to be empowered and empowered birth and empowered woman is now includes hormone therapy. So I just want more people to be questioning that a little bit because we need grandmothers, we need wise women, maybe a longer other conversation, but just to like seed it here is that we're not meant to only be in our individual sphere. So when we are in cross generation, the female nervous system that is the virgin crone nervous system is doesn't have the estrogenous need for peacemaking.
Right.
So so the ways in which maidens cannot defend themselves, virgins and crones can defend them. And so we're meant to be living that way so that we're not all trying to inhabit every piece of it at the same time, just like in birth.
Thank you so much, Kimberly.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or family member who needs to hear this content. And if you do share it on social media, don't forget to follow and tag me at Whose Body Is It? So until next time.